Welcome everybody today to our live webcast. We've talked about this, and if you've joined the previous sessions that we ran around Leadership for All series, you'll know that our view is it's time to kind of rethink what leadership means. Historically, the perception of leadership is that it only applies to a few individuals with seniority status within an organization, and the role of said leader was to provide guidance and direction to a team. So many of our conversations would have centered around leadership styles and how leaders can lead effectively. But in our Leadership for All series, which has been a range of podcasts, webcasts, and blogs, we wanted to explore how everyone can adopt key aspects of leadership within their roles today. So that's about giving each person an idea of some of the things that they can do to build on the topics that we're discussing and add value to not only yourselves, your families, but also your organizations as well. This has been done in partnership with myself, Nicholas Boyle. I'm a fellow of the Chartered Banker and an academic associate, but also director of Storm 7 Coaching. The series has covered multiple different areas, so ethical decision making, the impact of AI, and also vulnerable customers. But this last one is the making sustainable choices. So following on from COP26, I guess, is one of the biggest parts of this that we'll be talking about today. Is we just want to examine kind of the outcomes that were raised. You know, how can we challenge some of the practice within our organizations to embed sustainable practices? And that's the type of discussion we're going to have today. Before I introduce our guest, I also would like to say to everybody that obviously we had originally planned to have a further guest on, but unfortunately that guest has had to cancel off today. So it's going to be much more of a conversation between Billy and myself today. Also, it gives a great opportunity for you as the audience to be able to add a little bit of value as we go through. So if you do have any questions or anything you'd like us to talk about very specifically on this, then please don't hesitate, and we'll try and get to as many of the questions as we can during the session, and certainly towards the end of the session as well. So delighted to welcome Billy McLeod. Billy joins us today in the support of the overall webcasts. Billy joined, well, he was in RBS originally, and then Clydesdale Bank, part of the NAB group, for many years, before joining Allied Irish Bank to support the growth plans of AIB Bank in the UK. Now Chief of Staff and working, you know, obviously directly for the main team, the Managing Director in the UK, but also Billy has an MBA through Strathclyde University, which is great. Great to see. I always like to see people studying away, and that's a pretty strong qualification you have there as well, Billy. So welcome to the call today.
Good afternoon, Nick. I'm delighted to be here. Thank you for inviting me along. And I'm really looking forward to our conversation. It's a very topical, it's a very relevant subject matter, and I'm sure it's in all our minds. Now, I would just like to say to kick us off, I am not a sustainability expert in any way, shape, or form. I am, however, fascinated by the current challenges that are in our society, but more importantly, the role that our sector can play around about that. And actually, very, very proud of the financial services sector being highlighted as a critical part of all of some of those solutions in the way forward. So it kind of takes me back, Nick, to way back in the day when my dad used to say to me, look, what do you do for a living? He was a process worker. He loved getting big blocks of aluminium, and he created wings for aeroplanes. So he could see what he did for a living. And he used to say to me, what do you do for a living, son? And I said, well, Dad, I move bits of paper about a desk. And he was like, how's that going to work for you? You're never going to make a living out of that. And he was right. If that's the way I thought about it, then that's the kind of response I should expect. But my dad, I took him in the car one day, and we drove around the countryside, and I says, look, Dad, let me explain a little bit more about what I do. See that hospital over there? See that school over there? See that coffee shop down there? I helped those guys build this so that the community could thrive a little bit more. And it was at that point my dad just kind of went, all right, okay. So you do have a purpose in life. And you know, I get a sense that there's another moment coming here for the financial services sector to replay that moment again and be very proud of what it's achieved. And so I'm excited, I'm nervous, I'm motivated, but I understand the sense of responsibility that brings along the way, so we can have a proper conversation about some of those challenges and choices we've got to make. So hopefully that gives a bit of a flavour as to why I'm here today, and Nick, with your steer and guidance, we can maybe help some of the audience create some questions and support for them.
Yeah, thanks, Billy. It's a really important point. And, you know, again, I'm similar to you. I'm not a specialist in this subject. I obviously have done a blog, and we did do a podcast about this as well. And it was interesting when I was trying to prepare a little bit for today, because some statistics which I'll mention, which I just thought were interesting, were, you know, the top 5 countries in terms of emissions around about CO2 are the biggest being China, but followed up by US, India, Russia, and Japan. That was 2020 figures, International Energy Agency figures. And I think, well, that's one thing, I guess, which is you know, important to know. The UK, as an example, is 17th on that list with emissions of 1.1%. And I know a lot of people say things like, well, you know, what difference does it make then if we're only 1.1% of the whole? That, you know, if we do a lot of things, it's not going to make a huge difference. I guess that's probably one of the things I want to try and explore a little bit today as we go on, because I think it's important to understand that, you know, that we are not just individuals who can make small differences that will mean nothing. We are all individuals who can make small differences that can hopefully mount up to mean a lot. And organizations like ours, and I mean not only your organization that you work for, but also the Chartered Banker, we have a wider influence than just the UK and just the people. Obviously, we've got a massive influence all over the world. But even as an individual company, we've got an influence across the world in terms of our suppliers, in terms of the people that we deal with. Our customers have a big influence across the world. So, you know, always being on point around about the way that we talk about these things is so important. And getting it right at home and being able to then challenge practices is important. The one thing I guess we'll also touch on a little bit later, hopefully, is about the reduction that we've seen in global emissions since the pandemic, and actually how do we hold on to that, and what are some of the things that we, you know, should be doing now as the new normal kind of has changed into a kind of more hybrid approach to working. So yeah, so those are the types of things that we'll touch on today. And I guess just, you know, probably a good place to start, Billy, is just thinking about the follow on from COP26, kind of what trends and outcomes have you noticed being talked about within your organization that potentially wasn't happening beforehand?
Yeah, thanks, Nick. So COP26 was in one of a town close to me in Glasgow, which is close to my heart. So it was a big event, and it had a real mixed set of headlines attached to it, it would be fair to say. Now, obviously, since then, the geopolitical events and the war in Ukraine has taken, quite rightly, some of the priority as we go out through and we walk through towards the future. But turning back to the COP26, what we saw at the back of that was some strong commitments to, in particular, climate change. And there's massive work to be done here. But we are seeing a lot of our own business, a lot of our people, our customers, just looking at their reducing emissions and looking at their own carbon footprint and doing some work around about that. And that's having an obvious positive effect on the environment, as some of those statistics you talked about earlier, Nick. I mean, and more recently, we're seeing some people talk too much of the wider social aspects of you know, the ESG part of it, the social and the governance aspect of it, and setting them some ambition around about how they contribute to the community and what social events and positive influence they can have. And then perhaps maybe, you know, what does that impact would have on their community, whether that be local physically or whether that be the people that they connect with. So, and I suppose the bit in our sector has been some strong work around about, you know, vulnerable customers and making sure social inclusion is high on the agenda as well. And that's not a financial services thing. That's something that's happened across the business as we've had this rapid transition out of the pandemic into a very technological driven society. And how do we make sure we bring everybody with us as we go through that, as we go along that journey? So, and I'm sure we'll touch on some of these further down the line in our conversation, but you know, it's immediate climate, I think, has been the first point of reference, starting to move into some of those social trends, and then some work on making sure there's some inclusion for all parts of our society is what we have seen, Nick, out of the back of the COP26 in Glasgow.
Yeah, you know, it's such an important point that you raised there, because obviously the big thing last November was COP26. Since then, you know, we've got an energy crisis, we've got a horrific war happening. You know, we've got those the sort of ends of the pandemic, and potentially, you know, in some areas we're seeing some resurrection of cases as well in that. So there's a lot of things happening, you know, geez, politically as well. You know, there's been a bunch of things. Obviously, the UK has some change happening as well at the moment. So there's a lot of talk about a lot of things that maybe have pushed the climate aspects to the back again. But I get this, you know, obviously I've got two teenage children, and I know that something is still very strong in their minds, as it should be on all of our minds. And so it's important for us to keep listening to people, I guess, and keep thinking about some of the things that need to get done. So, you know, how do we continue to keep alive the key points about this, to keep bringing them into our organizations and keep talking about them? And I mean, you know, I guess if I was working in a bank at the moment, one of the things I'd probably be doing is talking about COP26 now again. Is that a fair challenge to you and other potential, you know, bank staff?
Yeah, it's a great question, Nick. And the reason it's a great question is because I think there has been already a shift in terms of the responsibility people take, the purpose they believe in their life, and the decisions that they're making. So I think one of the things we were considering as we were preparing for this is like, what can we do about that? So I think the regulator initially started with a little bit of framework, risk management frameworks, reporting, disclosures, to encourage banks to step into this space and really have an influence on it. And I think that was embarrassingly necessary, but necessary all the same. But I think it's shifted now. And I think people within the banking sector, and in fact, all corporates and all businesses, are starting to get to the space where actually this is our purpose. This can be our differentiator. We have a responsibility to make sure our business comes out of the pandemic and the COP26 and all the climate change ambition in a way that makes our business is future-proof. So I think that's shifted more now, Nick, towards individuals making choices, and that's the way they're challenging their organisation. So they make challenges in a variety of different ways, and you see it every day. So people are challenging as an individual. What can I do? What do I do? What kind of goods and services do I utilise as an individual? And what are their green credentials? And does that influence my choice? And I think the evidence and the statistics show that people are much more conscious of making those decisions with that in their mind. And I suppose as part of the business again, but particularly in banks, there is an onus and responsibility to do this, but there are more questions and more ambition and more risk management framework questions around about what does that business look like in terms of its green status? What does that supply chain that business operates along with? And should we, could we, or would we help them? And would it be in a traditional way, or should it be in a different way? You know, do we do some green transitional finance, or do we support certain sectors that perhaps will help us, such as renewable energies, and some of those investment projects that we talked about at the start of the call? I think that the other choices that people are making here, the other challenges are things like what investments do I as an individual want to do with my salary and my earnings? What does a pension pot kind of look and feel like? Should it be a green pension? Should I transfer in? Does the company I take my loans for my car and my goods and services? And what's the green credentials round about there? So I think the challenges are already in existence here, Nick, as an individual. And I think they are getting on the agenda in terms of how do we structure our businesses and our banking business models to make sure that they are, and how do we influence that? And I suppose there is an element here, and I know we're going to come and talk about culture, but people are looking for that experience of being involved now. I think it was a nice to have before, but I think people are now, or I see it, I have evidence of it, that where their choices of the organisations that they want to work for, in particular, the market's really hot just now, and that's a big say as to whether they choose to work for a bank that has that kind of mentality in terms of sustainability.
Yeah.
Sorry, Nick, can you go?
I was just going to say it's such an important point, actually, that and that choice that we have to work for organisations or to buy certain produce from certain organisations. You know, I think it's so important to remember that we do have choice as individuals, and that can be so powerful when you think about that way. And I'm not talking about demonstrations or anything like that, but just simple buying choices. Or organisationally, yes, I would really, personally, I would not work for organisations that I didn't feel were making some achievable differences in climate. And I think that's one of the key things that we need to keep in mind. And it's just as when I go to the supermarket now, I don't buy or try to limit any plastics that I purchase. However, there's a part here which says, is there not more being done by other people to help us with that? You know, plastics should be limited, but it isn't, or it doesn't seem to be at times. But we've got a question in which I'm going to go straight to, actually. Just it's an anonymous one. If you'd like to put your names on them, that would be great. But obviously, if you'd like to do them anonymously, that's also fine. The question is, do you think it's fair to say that the collective consensus within our sector is that we want to be better and embed sustainable practices? And I think that's a big absolutely yes. I'm sure I'll come back to you in a sec, Billy, see if you agree with that or not. But do we feel a bit overwhelmed and unsure where to start? Or do you think there are other reasons that potentially slow down progress on this front? So what would your thoughts be on that, Billy?
Yeah, great question. Thank you for the question. And I'm going to, there was a couple of phrases in that question that says, are we overwhelmed? Does the sense of responsibility in our sector give us a challenge, and would we get it right? And I think it's a great question, because the starting point for our services and our sector is that do we have data? Do we have benchmarking? Do we know where our starting position is? And that's difficult. It's extremely difficult. But with a mixture of structure and a mixture of starting somewhere or starting the process, I think we can make a very positive, I think significantly positive step. But there are probably 3 points I would like to make to it. One is, and there are people whose role title is sustainability lead or manager or that, but that it's not actually their job to be the sustainability champion. Maybe champion is the right word. It's not their job to be sustainable. It's their job to help us all be sustainable. So it shouldn't be just one individual's role. It should be all our roles. And if you get that bit right, I think our businesses, our banks will be much more effective in this subject matter. And I suppose the other thing that we just touched on there is the second point. It's around about there should be business frameworks, so that you kind of have a pretty decent plan as to what you want to do. Now the plan will change. All plans change, and if you have a structure, if you work towards that structure and you get the buy-in to that, then you're going to make a significant contribution to the way your business is perceived and the way your business actually is, and both externally and internally. And I suppose the last point I wanted to make on that, and this is all kind of related to culture, Nick, and it's round about once it can't be a one and done. This has to be part of your DNA. There has to be a significant investment from A, the individuals, B, the business, and the leaders of that business and the sector at all. So it has to be encouraged. It has to be trained properly. It needs to be educated properly. And there is an element here as well, is that there has to be open to challenge, because there is no right answer to some of this stuff. But the opportunity to try things and suggest things that will make our lives and our customers' lives better should be encouraged. So hopefully that answers the question.
Yeah, it does, and I think just the point I probably wanted to focus in on this question as well was the overwhelmed part, because I think sometimes it's also about us understanding that it takes time to develop these. I remember when they used to kind of develop new products and they would close down old products. I mean, the process could sometimes take a couple of years to do a simple thing like that. Whereas now what we've seen is much more change happening much more quickly. So if you start looking around banks generally and you start thinking about some of the different things that they've done, like, you know, potentially investments or investment funds which are green only, credit policies which focus on, you know, how businesses are going to bring down their emissions, and then potentially there'll be access to more funding for them. Those types of things I think are really positive. I actually spoke to somebody quite recently about actually how do we start thinking ahead a little bit, and what they were doing at that moment in time was slightly related to climate challenge, was around about the kind of energy crisis right now and the cost of that. Looking at businesses and thinking, right, we know that there's going to be a big challenge for them 6 months down the line. So how do we help impact our credit understanding now, so that when we get there, we're actually there to help them and not just say, I'm sorry, the numbers don't look good, we can't help you anymore. You know, there needs to be an appreciation of the challenge that we're all going through and a real working together with our community. Be that individuals who just need to invest some money, or be that companies that need to manage the energy crisis, or indeed just everyday people trying to, you know, get about and be, you know, just pay their bills and live their lives. So overwhelmed, I'm not sure. I think sometimes these just things maybe take a little bit more time to get started.
And I think, Nick, what we have as a sector is a track record of attempting to model what the future might look like and setting ourselves some tolerances levels round about what that looks like. So if you take, for example, the high cost of living, what does a portfolio in your business kind of look and feel like? And what will it take if there was a shift in interest rates to, or the energy prices go to, what does that look like in terms of households? We've actually got a really good track record of modelling that through and seeing where that could take us, and then developing some solutions and support as we go along the way. And it's, you know, I think what we're seeing now is it's not just for those that can make it, it's can we take everybody with us on the journey as we go along there. So we've got a great track record and a great basis. So overwhelmed, I would like to think that we've got the right tools in our locker to help with this sustainability agenda.
Yeah, and I think, you know, we as individuals in banks need to continually ask those questions and challenge. And I think that's how we bring around about institutional change, is by saying, look, we're up for this. We want to get involved. We want to be part of the change and the solution going forward. A couple of questions have come in. We'll just jump through these as they come in, I think, because I really like this question because I think it's an important one. But how have attitudes towards sustainability changed compared to potentially 10 years ago? In my view, they've changed substantially. What would you think to that one, Billy?
Yeah, and I think I touched on this earlier on in terms of in the financial services sector, we kind of we're getting to the place of feeling proud that we can help influence the wider society and be seen as a critical component within that. And I think that's the bit to keep a hold of. So the responsibility, and being identified as a very positive solution is absolutely paramount for the way we should go about this. So what does that mean in the back of it? In the back of that, that means it needs some investment. That means it needs some structure to get forward. But I think that moving from that, the regulator has told all banks to do this because it's good governance and it helps society, to no, actually this can actually work for us because we can see the benefits. And in fact, our customers and our staff are telling us that it's not optional anymore. So I think the behavioural change, or the perception changes, that has gone from we've been told to do it before, now we're in a bit where we actually really have no option but to take sustainability agenda seriously and drive it forward. And that could manifest itself in a lot of different ways going forward, but I think the most important thing is it's our choice to do it. And in the main, for what I see, most banks are stepping up to the plate to make that happen.
Okay, I agree, and I think so. Just to finish off the kind of first part of this, I think, you know, we know what the challenges are. We do believe that banks are making some progress. Some will be quicker than others, no doubt about it. Some will be making, you know, larger strides. But it's important for everybody to consider what it is your bank is doing, what it is your company is doing to help progress in those areas, and then start to look at how you can challenge as individuals, because some of it is about knowledge, and there's no doubt that this is not an area that particularly banks have been strong at over the years. However, they are making a good go of it now. I think that, you know, to go back to the attitudes towards sustainable change, they've definitely changed over the last 10 years, and banks are now making, you know, I mean, I've seen, you know, kind of missions from banks change from all about service or all about sales to actually all about sustainability. That doesn't happen if we aren't making good progress. One of the things that I probably just want to touch on as well is this whole aspect of greenwashing, though, because I think that is an important part that we need to manage out of the conversation. You know, we've seen a lot of things around about greenwashing. There was a TV program recently, you know, about a big drinks manufacturer and how they have made so many promises and not be able to deliver them. There's also, you know, things like, I don't know whether these are stories or urban legends sometimes, but you hear about the big sort of festivals that have been happening down south, and, you know, there's been these free electric points to come and sort of charge your cars, but behind the scenes, about, you know, 100 meters away, there's diesel engines that are powering those electric points, which doesn't seem to make any sense. And I guess the fact that we've got the electric points is brilliant as a step forward, but the fact that we're still, you know, having to use diesel generators to back them up can be a bit of a nightmare. So, you know, greenwashing is definitely something that we need to be, as individuals, I think, you know, shouting about, calling out, and talking about. What are your thoughts on the greenwashing debate?
Yeah, great question. So I don't have a definition for greenwashing, and I certainly don't think anyone sets out with the intention to greenwash. And I think it's a byproduct of perhaps underinvestment, rather than that, you know, rather than anything else. I think the intent and the purpose will be, as some of those examples you've said, Nick, are absolutely spot on. But and again, I've got a simple rule, you know, if it's beginning to look like, smell like a marketing campaign, then you can sense that there's a bit of greenwashing involved. And you know, it's a terrible phrase actually, greenwashing, but you know, it needs to be invested in. It needs to have evidence and data points to reference to show exactly why it's not greenwashing, and it needs to be done in a well thought through way. You know, and all the better if you can get some independent reference that says, yeah, it's not just their idea or their product, or that, and you know, we have actually validated that, and there are some real good professionals out there that will help you with that, I suppose. But it's difficult, Nick, isn't it? It's difficult because there's no right answer. And what I wouldn't want to do is that we stop trying things for the fear of being called out greenwashing. But what I would like for us to do as an industry is make sure that when we do make the investment and we do make the initiatives happen and come alive, that we have got the right investment, we've got the right structure attached to it, so that those things become a thing of the past. And again, banks have a real strong reputation in this space, so I wouldn't like to think we would jeopardise that going forward. And our job is to help every one of our customers in our portfolio to think similarly.
Yeah, it's really interesting, and I think you're right. You know, the positive sort of glass half full of us would consider that anybody going into doing some positive change isn't going to do it to try and pull the wool over people's eyes. They're going to do it for the right reasons. They might not do it that well, which then therefore comes across as greenwashing. And you know, in terms of that drinks company, you know, it was a very, very difficult thing for them to do. But yeah, but you're probably well intentioned in places, and I think that's where we need to be able to support not only internally within the banking industry, but also some of the customers we deal with. And I think, you know, when we're looking at, let's say, a corporate credit proposal or a business credit proposal, you know, often as a bank we'll look at different kinds of risks, and I think that climate is definitely a risk that should be on all credit proposals, that we should be talking about, and it should be something that, you know, even looking into aspects of greenwashing. Well, what are this company doing and what are they saying about what they're doing? I think that's the type of things that we can start bringing alive within our organizations.
Yeah, there's a very simple principle to make sure that, you know, sustainability is on your decision-making agenda. You know, it's a simple thing to do, difficult to do as well, because there's a lot of grey involved in the subject matter and the decisions, and a lot of commercial decisions. So decisions that have been perhaps in the past based on profit and loss, growth, balance sheet, and economics have a different dynamic attached to it, and that takes a bit of getting used to. Do you know, 10% for 2 years or 3% for 5 years? You know, it's that kind of a mentality. Whereas banks, we are moving much towards the longevity rather than the short-termism that perhaps we maybe tried in the past. So that in itself creates removing of the greenwashing elements within our sector in particular.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. We do need that longer-term approach, but we also need the quick action. We talked briefly about this before, Billy, and I mentioned that one of my sort of pet hates is pet hate's probably a strong word for it, but you know, when somebody says we're planting trees, you know, to offset, you know, carbon, I think, well, great, that's going to help in 10 years, but what are you doing now that's going to help? So yeah, the practice is the right kind of thinking. It's doing the right thing. It's taking positive action, but actually it's not necessarily positive action that's quick enough. And that would be my only challenge to the kind of longer term. However, to your point, we have to still have that embedded in long-term thinking, because we need to make that long-term thinking, but have constant positive, you know, action happening along the way that doesn't stop because of, you know, other things getting in the road.
Yeah, and your analogy there around about does our lending principles include sustainability in its decision making, and you know, as individuals, the audience that are on this call here, whether it's a lending proposition or a buying decision that needs to be made, or whether it's a third-party supplier you want to use, having the sustainability lens front and center is probably not an option anymore. It has to be paramount, you know, and again, good structures, good processes and good disciplines to enable us to work our way through this in a very positive way. Yeah, absolutely. And you know, when you're saying that, I think, you know, coming back to the things that individuals we can do, but also things we can manage within our organizations, is simple things around about costs, heating, electricity, you know, all those things. Residential is the 5th biggest impact on CO2 emissions in the world, you know, according as of 2020. So if in our homes we can do things, if in our offices we can do things, and we can be positive about our approach, you know, making sure our computer's off at night doesn't seem like a big thing to do, but doing it will have an impact, you know, because not doing it won't help. Turning the lights out, you know, when you leave the office, doing all these little things. Even now, that kind of shift that we talked about, and said we'd come back to this at some point, you know, we've gone through hybrid working. So one of the, I think it's the second biggest impact
worldwide on emissions is transport. So, you know, thinking about the hybrid approach that we developed during the pandemic, and the fact that pandemic actually reduced CO2 emissions, you know, overall over the couple of years. You know, how has your organization, or how have organizations generally started to adapt back? Because we don't, you know, I'd love it to be in a situation where we didn't go all the way back to where we were. We actually learned something from this and moved forward in a more sort of joined up approach to try and tackle climate, as well as the issues around the pandemic.
Yeah, so the hybrid working learnings from COVID is, I see most banks, if not all banks, really embracing some of the learnings of that, which helps and contributes significantly to the sustainability agenda. And really getting to the stage of you travel to the office when necessary, when required. Now there's all sorts of, you know, some jobs have to be 5 days a week in the office and you have to travel, and that's absolutely right. There are some jobs that don't have that necessity to do that, but I think we all, as human beings, need to socially interact, to grow, to evolve, to learn, to educate ourselves, and actually be relevant in the community. So it's not that we're all going to work from home and the world will be a better place, because I fundamentally believe it won't, because we're human beings. And I keep coming back to that. So there are sustainability, there are things we can do. We make the right choices. You know, we travel to work when it's the right thing to do. We make sure that you get a voice at the table when your bank is talking about how it's going to organise itself, either in the short, medium, and the longer term, and have conversations that let your own feelings known. And certainly when we're recruiting for staff, which is a difficult thing to do just now, the number one, which it used to be salary, and now it's what's my working conditions going to look like? Will I have the opportunity and flexibility? What's the kit I'm going to get that's going to make my job look really good? And how impactful can I be around about that? And these are all things that should have a sustainable lens on them. So in terms of that hybrid operating model, I still think there is a massive requirement for us to be socially interactive. But I think we are going to make sure it's appropriate and right sized going forward, and I see that in every bank I've spoken to in the industry. Yeah.
And you know, 10 years ago, the biggest expense that a lot of the big banks had was the property portfolio. Not staff, actually normally it would be staff, but it was the property portfolio in some of them. So, and probably the big 5 banks have gone through a huge process of cutting down on property. And be much better managed from a time perspective. And I think, you know, the pandemic, we've seen a lot more of that kind of advanced, as people not going back to the same offices they used to go back, because that's no longer there, because there's not actually a requirement for them to be in office, because now we can work hybrid, we can work smarter, and actually cutting down on that footprint, I think, is really, really important. So yeah, those are some of the things. So I guess there's a couple more questions that I'm going to come to, and we'll finish off. Probably just my perspective so far is, from what our discussion is, that yeah, we do think it's still on the agenda. I think it could be talked about a little bit more, but there's also some big issues in the worldwide context that we need to be talking about as well at the moment. Some of those interject, which will be the topic I'll come on to in a second, from a question from Anthony Boyd. We do believe that there is a lot of individual choice, not only in the things that we do every day, but also in how we interact with our organizations and how we talk about these challenges, and how do we make sure that they're high on the agenda. And actually then, how do we start bringing that into our customer interactions and our customer discussions about how they are doing things. That's not to negatively challenge anybody on this, but it is, you know, especially if you're working in a branch, you know, that's a really hard discussion to have about, you know, saying, well, we can't give you a mortgage because you don't recycle properly. I mean, that would never happen. However, you know, educating customers on how best they could do these things is something that maybe we should be doing more of. The point that Anthony made, I thought, was a really good question, was actually the war in Ukraine is terrible, but how could the war be a catalyst that creates a quantum leap in driving sustainability, especially in the energy sector? And you know, I think we're all very, very energy cost focused at the moment. You know, I haven't had my heating on in ages now, probably longer than my family would like, but I think we all understand the reasons behind that, and the costs that are going to be coming up soon. So actually, how can we make something terrible like that work to the advantage of the whole for a longer period? And I mean, for the world advantage. Is there anything in that for you?
Yeah, and listen, again, I'm not an energy sector specialist, but I'll give you my own perspective of what I see and what I've experienced. And thanks, Anthony, for the question. So I've just got my recent statement in from my energy supplier, and it takes a big gulp and maybe a glass of whiskey to get me through the night once I've read it. But so three things. One is you make different choices in terms of how you use your own energy. And I think that's one thing. I think we will create a competitive edge in some way, shape or form in terms of the choice of providers that we're going to use as individuals. And I think that's appropriate. And as Nick says there, the opportunity to put the heating on or to put a cardigan on is maybe one of those choices. I think as individuals, businesses though as well, we have to just make sure our reliance on those types of things have alternatives. To keep everybody honest, to keep everybody safe, and to make sure there's a continuity in their services. So whether it's energy or any other supplier, you do have to make sure you have a real forward view of what that alternative service provision could and look like. And I suppose then as a sector, the supply or support to alternative forms of energy provision, and in terms of renewables, in terms of other projects that would create energy, would be something to be very proud of, to make sure that that step forward and some of those initiatives are taking place. So hopefully that answers the question, Anthony. But quite happy to put you in touch with our energy services specialist. But that's a perspective from my point of view.
Yeah, I think absolutely. It's just shone a really important light on a number of areas globally around about where our production comes from and the impact that that's had. Ukraine is also one of those kind of grain store countries, kind of breadbasket countries of the world, where they supply so much to the world food, and obviously there's an increasing impact on the cost of that now. There's a lesser supply of it, so we've seen the impact on certain products in the shops and everything else. So it really has shone a light on things like that maybe a lot of us didn't realise. And I think the whole EU approach to where they get their oil and their resources from in the future, and potentially turning on the renewables more and more is a good thing to be done. So hopefully that does take us forward. Anonymous question here about I'm not in a leadership role as such, but would love to support sustainability within our sector. What do you think leadership or support looks like in this area, and what can we do? And I know the Chartered Banker will have some strong views on what you can do about that. What are your thoughts, Billy?
Yeah, I'm very keen that our sector does the right thing and everyone plays their part. And I think so a couple of things is hopefully today's conversation helps with that. The individual choices you can make, the conversations you can have in your teams and in your businesses, and as your businesses roll out things, just keeping sustainability on the agenda. So hopefully there are 3 or 4 things that can help as you go along the way. But I suppose for me, the proudest thing I would have to see happen in our services sector, financial services sector, would be how qualified we are. Are we serious about that? And I know the Chartered Banker do some great work on green qualifications and ethical banking, responsible banking, and its partnership in the academy with the UN going forward will be a significant contributor to that. I would like to see us taking the lead. We can't be advisors without the proper credentials and qualifications to do that. And I'd be hugely proud, immensely proud, if there were more sustainably educated and qualified individuals within the financial services sector to help us with that journey going forward. So, and that can be undertaken by any individual, regardless of your role, regardless of your seniority within the organisations. So, hopefully that helps. It wasn't meant to be a sales pitch, I promise, but I genuinely believe that would give us credence, and that would give everybody an opportunity to play a part, and a significant part in the sustainability agenda.
Yeah, as an industry that's not regulated in that way from a requirement to have qualifications, there's not that many industries left. You have to be qualified to be an estate agent or an accountant or anything else. But for ours, there isn't. But I know a lot of work has happened over the years in terms of qualifying people. A lot of our apprenticeship programs in banks will start that process with the professional banking certificate through the chartered banker, all the way up to different kind of levels of endpoint assessment and level 7s and all these type of qualifications, which are all excellent, and they all include some chartered banker work in it, which is great. And I think embracing all of those strategies is really important right now for organizations to help bring people through at all levels. I do agree that the certificate in green finance and things like that also need to be used, especially for some of our more experienced people, because I think we always talk about we'll start bringing these through at apprenticeship level or graduate level, but actually we need to start bringing them in at some of our senior levels. So for me, seeing more and more people do those kind of things would be great, and owning it. So hopefully that answers your question around about it. I think it's a really good question, because I think we do need to do more. It probably leads us to our final question as well, which is also from an anonymous person. But what would we like to see happen in the future for the banking sector in this area? What would your vision of the future be for this, Billy? And that's not obviously, that's your vision rather than your company's potential. I don't want to tie you up in knots internally, but what are your kind of thoughts on what you'd like to see in the industry? Now, I'll maybe give you some of mine as well.
Okay, so I think we've touched on most of them. I think what I would like to see in terms of sustainability for our services sector is deliver on the opportunity that sits in front of us just now. We've already been identified as a huge component, probably the most critical component for helping the whole of society to do that. I would hate to think that we didn't play our part. So that's the first thing. The second thing is it doesn't matter what your role, your responsibility, or your seniority is. Every single one of us can play our part, and particularly the climate and/or the social and the inclusion agenda. And that's just by being curious and just making sure we continue to be curious. But in terms of our vision, and what it would look and feel like as transcends over the next 5-10 years, is that we created the catalyst and a societal change that allows all individuals and businesses to make better choices and better decisions going forward, so that we're not back in this position, or we don't regress in this position. There will be other challenges, and perhaps banks will be seen as a solution and the critical component of those positive solutions going forward for other challenges we have in the world. So it might seem a bit altruistic or perhaps lofty ambitions, but done right, I genuinely believe that, and we'd all be hugely proud to be that successful over the next 5 and 10 years. Does that help, Nick?
It does, and it just made me reflect there around about a conversation I had about a year ago, where the conversation was around about, well, we're talking about, as a bank, becoming much more green aware and climate conscious. So one of the things that was talked about was changing of policy to make sure that we start to reduce the funding of heavy CO2 emissions. So it could be a coal manufacturer, a company that's heavy in coal or oil. How would we approach them? And a lot of thinking in the industry was, well, that's all very well to say that we're going to do all these things, but when it comes down to whether we're going to make the profit or not, that's the tester of whether or not we have been able to make some progress. So are we going to forgo income to maximize climate? And I have to say, I really believe that we are moving past that now within a year. I think the message is out there. That's just not a conversation that we should be having, because it won't happen. We've got to start showing that. So because I think, again, I talked about long-term thinking rather than just short-term. The short-term thinking, negative short-term thinking in this discussion is that's how we'll approach it. But long-term, we've got to get past that. We can't be seen to be thinking in that way at all. So yeah, so I'd like us to be a beacon of righteousness in terms of climate to the world. So as a bank, I'd like us to, or banks, I'd like us to challenge everything that we do. So who are the supply chain that we use? Who are we funding? And how can we ensure that they are all climate conscious, climate aware, and taking positive action on these things? Now, everything I'm saying, I believe, is being worked on within the different parts of the banks within the UK and broader field. I've spoken to representatives in Asia. I've spoken to representatives of banks in South Africa, and also of ones in Australia. So I know for a fact there's a lot of things happening worldwide. Maybe there'll still be areas and pockets that it isn't, but I think there's certainly a lot of action. And starting as organisations, through organisations like the Chartered Banker, being more joined up around about these things, sharing some great best practice across the organisation in areas where we kind of put the competitive side away and start thinking more about, actually there's a really important reason that we share some great practices in these areas. Hopefully that would be the type of approach I'd like to see happening. So hopefully that answers the question. I think some real progress in real areas, but I'll go back to a point that was made earlier by Billy, was that we all need to start looking into our own organisations and our own selves and finding out what's happening, asking the questions. And I think that is really important if we can do that to start off our own journeys. And I know a lot of you in this call will be pretty well progressed in that kind of thought process. So keep going. Don't let other things in the world that are equally challenging and things that we do need to focus on, like the energy crisis, like the war in Ukraine. But we need to make sure that we keep this particular topic on the agenda for as long as we can. I'm going to end the call there. Billy, any kind of final words or thoughts from you? Hopefully you've enjoyed the session, and I do appreciate it's just been a one-on-one conversation today. So hopefully you've been okay with that. And any kind of final comments or thoughts you wanted to get across?
Nick, I've thoroughly enjoyed the last hour. It's flown, and I can't believe it. So I hope the audience has as well. As the final points for me were round about kind of for the journey that we started with. There's a huge excitement, nervousness, but really motivated group of people within our sector that I would really like to think that we could be a positive influence on the sustainable agenda. And it doesn't matter where you are or how you're connected to our sector. There are support, there are mechanisms for everyone to play their part, and I think that's the key message. As the title of your program is, it's leadership for all, and I think that's been most welcome. I've certainly taken some thoughts and ideas out of the conversation and the questions that have been posed. So my job is to take this back to my organisation and challenge some of the thinking as well. So I've learned again more than I've given, hopefully, out of today. So thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Billy. It's so much appreciated, not only by the Chartered Banker Institute, but myself and everybody listening, that you joined and gave us your perspective. And I think the one thing is that none of us are experts in this. I think we're all trying to upskill and become more knowledgeable. So thank you for your contribution today. I'd like to bring this to a close and just say, look, if there are any questions anybody has off the back of this, please get in touch with myself or Emma O'Sullivan into the Chartered Banker Institute. If there's anything else that we haven't answered that you would like to answer, but first and foremost, thanks to you all who attended, and those of you who are listening back on the YouTube channel. We really appreciate you doing that. So thank you very, very much, because actually having you listening makes it worth talking about these kind of subjects, and hopefully you take something from it, you learn from it, as Billy says, and we take some action that's really positive really impactful on our industry in the right way. So thank you all very much. So thanks to Chartered Banker. My name is Nicholas Boyle. So thank you again from me, and good luck to you all in your journey around about sustainable choices. Thank you very much.